Pebble in the Dark, Chapter 1. Unsure of how long he had slept undisturbed, Vincent Madden was certain that it hadn't been long. It was often the case, when he had plaguing thoughts, that sleep was the last thing on his mind. Fumbling for the illumination function on his watch, he was thankful that he had been able to get 4 hours. The unfamiliar surroundings, which he should have grown used to by now, still startled him, even after all of these years, as they do most people who wake up somewhere unknown next to a stranger. It was certainly the cocktail of subtle differences which, even in the dark, shouted, "You are far from home." The feeling can certainly be a pleasant one, much like a tourist on holiday will often be surprised and happy to have awoken without the prospect of facing the daily grind of going to work, and pleased to be away from all things which they associate with home. A chuckle in the silence at the thought that this could be misconstrued as a holiday escaped his lips. The comfortable mattress was dressed in the odour of the clean yet foreign-smelling sheets and covers that offered protection from the uncharacteristic cold which enveloped the room and no doubt the world outside. In the darkness, almost forgetting the importance of the day and task which lay ahead of him, he lifted the weight of his body slightly up onto his elbows and focused his attention on Lara, who was lying beside him. She still slept soundly, and shards of light illuminated her as she rested peacefully in the darkness, her blonde hair partially covering her face and spread over the pillow as her head lay tilted away from him. He watched her for a moment, remembering the events of the night before. He had been at a local bar enjoying a drink in the early evening. He had seen her, a lonely backpacker, sitting alone at a table in the corner, staring forlornly at her mobile phone. As time went on, she had looked increasingly upset, so he'd walked over to ask if she was okay and introduced himself as Ryan. Her face had lit up when she heard that he spoke English, and she had eagerly explained to him that she'd been travelling with friends and become separated. Her phone battery was nearly dead, and she had no phone credit or money to get in contact with them. He quickly identified her Dutch accent. Her predicament had struck a chord with Vincent, who recalled feeling sorry for her, particularly when he saw the size of her backpack, which looked larger than she could physically carry. He had immediately offered to drive her to where she needed to go the following day. Vincent had taken her to a restaurant, as she seemed exhausted and looked as though she hadn't had a good meal in a while. It had been a long time since he had enjoyed the company of such an innocent, vibrant, friendly and interesting woman. She had started by talking about her recently completed studies in the Netherlands, her family, her friends, and her hopes for the future. Vincent had not been quite as truthful about himself, which was something he despised about his line of work. Reaching in the pitch darkness across to the bedside table, he searched with his fingers through a variety of paperwork and items for the switch to the bedside lamp. His fingers tripped up on a box of cigarettes, and as he grasped them longingly, he decided that light wasn't necessary to find the way out to the balcony for a quick smoke. Bringing his legs down towards the ground with a swinging motion, he righted himself at the side of the bed. The uncomfortable metal bed frame dug into the back of his legs. This was eclipsed by a slight throbbing pain at his temples, which was a precursor to a possible headache to come. The balcony door, unlocked and fairly insecure on its hinges, swung open freely, allowing a blast of cold air to hit him. If there was any part of Vincent that was still trying to remain dormant and inactive, the cold air was the bucket of ice that woke him to the core. The bathrobe and thick socks he had donned to venture onto the balcony were scant, but he would only be a moment. Stepping out onto the concrete floor, the cold immediately made itself known upon the soles of his feet, but this did not bother him. Since he could remember himself, he had smoked, and since he could remember, he couldn't stand people who smoked inside. The lighter, as always, lodged inside the box, was quickly pulled out with a cigarette. He realized that even though he had looked at his watch, maybe not even 5 minutes earlier, he had no idea what the time was. Strange that he knew he'd only slept 4 hours, but stranger things had happened. No need to check again, he thought. For the next 5 minutes, there was no need for time. The crackling of the tobacco and paper as he lit the cigarette was a sound which he had always found relaxing. Walking forward toward the balcony rail, he could see that the moonlight was casting an effervescent glow over the town. The linden trees, which during the summer months would have made for such a pleasant scent, were as cold and dormant as the rest of the sleepy town. The iridescent nuance of the moon on the powdery snow, which had come to rest on the branches, gave the feeling of the dormant beauty that lay within the trees. One could be forgiven for thinking that nobody would be stirring so early on a morning as still and cold as this. From the 5th floor of the apartment block where he stood, Vincent could see everything which lay before him, tinted by the light of the moon. The old communist-style apartment blocks, which surrounded the wooded park below, were as silhouettes in the darkness. A few lit rooms identified the first people waking up in familiar surroundings and preparing for the daily grind. Familiarity, of course, a commodity which is relative to the place and people that it is applied to. It seemed an outright shame that in the midst of such beautiful nature there should be apartment buildings as ugly as the one in which he had taken up temporary accommodation. Nature, the most basic and simple pleasure, overlooked by so many on a day-to-day basis, but he was glad that he was still able to admire and take solace in it. There was something beautiful about his apartment. However, she still lay sleeping peacefully. Vincent recalled how already by 10 p.m. the previous night they had felt that they knew each other well and had made their way back to the flat which he had called home for the past few days. They had shared a couple of bottles of wine with their meal, and she had seemed keen to jump into bed with him, which had been a pleasant development, he thought. Vincent wondered whether he had taken advantage of her, but justified his actions to himself by the logic that he certainly would have helped her one way or the other. Over the course of the evening, Lara had become much more confident and assertive than she had been when he had first approached her. He remembered thinking at one point that she really did not seem the hitchhiking type. Exhaling a puff of smoke with a quiet laugh, he wondered whether perhaps she had taken advantage of him. The past few months had been difficult and lonely for Vincent, who had not had the time for passionate engagements. He had caught himself on several occasions that he could remember fantasizing about a life more ordinary, not during the day, but at night when he had time to be alone with his thoughts. He would think back to simpler times when he had friends, family, a woman he loved, and generally a life outside of his profession. Out of no choice of his own, he had been ripped from this life and forced to walk a different path, on which he had done some good, but also quite a lot of bad. Rubbing the back of his head and shaking it slightly to rid himself of any further such thoughts, Vincent's experience last night with Lara brought home his ever-increasing desire to start again. He stubbed a cigarette out on the balcony rail, and the tips of his fingers came into contact with the icy metal. Hoping that the water would be warmer than the rail, Vincent discarded the cigarette butt and headed for the shower room. Hi, my name's Antony Botting, and I'm the author of the Pebble in the Dark trilogy. If you'd like to hear more of this story, please subscribe to this channel and ring the bell below. See you next time.